So let's continue here and add more items into our array. So I'm going to come down here. Instead of removing, let's get rid of this. We understand how to do this. I'm going to say name.add. I'm going to add Arnold. Instead of hello, I'm going to say James. It seems like I never have better names. Go back to just a general one like that. Okay, let's say, put here bond name dot add Bonnie. All right, that's fine. Very good. So save this, give it a run. Of course, nothing new here. We're gonna just see our array, but it's an array list, of course, because we know this with all the names. Now, what's going on here? I checked call element raw type. So it looks like it needs us to do something. That's fine. All right, so now that we have this, how do we then, for instance, if we want to be able to get the first item here, because with arrays, we were able to use the square brackets and then put in the index number and get the value. Now with ArrayList, we have a different approach here. To get an item from our array list, we just say name, and we can use a method call. Say dot get, we can pass in something, the index here. That integer is the index that we can pass. So if we say 0, if you save like that, of course, you're going to see that we have now bond as number 0 that we got. So bond is the first element in the array. Okay. If we want another index, let's say index 3, save and run, we're going to see here there is Arnold because there's 0, 1, 2, 3. That's the last one. And it is indeed Arnold, as you see there. Okay, so there we go. So we're able to get things from our array list just like we were able to get things from our array. Now we can call the method get and pass in the index, and we're able to get the item on that index. The other question is, how do we then loop through an array list to get all those elements? Well, let's go ahead and comment this out here. So what we can do the same thing. We say for, I'm going to say int I is equal to 0. I'm going to say I is less than name dot length. You notice the moment we try to access the length, it doesn't work, right? Because array list doesn't have a length. But then what is it that we can use to get the length of an array list? Well, because now we're talking about a better version of an array, more towards an object-oriented programming paradigm, we now have what we call a size. So this is one of the main differentiations between arrays and array lists, because instead of saying name that length, we don't have it, we have name that size. Okay, so that size like that is going to give us the length I++. So we can come down here, say s out again, and I can go ahead and say items, or rather names. And I'm going to iterate through. How do I do that? We do the same what we did. So name.get, and I'm going to pass the I as we iterate through, and it should go ahead and get all of the names we have inside. So save this and give it a run. Now we can see all of the names. We have Bond, James, Bonnie, and Arnold. Very good. Now, this for loop here is fun because that's what we know of. There is another way of looping through. I call this the clever for. And I'm going to put a type here, string. I'm going to call name, and I'm going to put colon as that. And I'm going to pass the actual name of our array list here. Say name. So, and then of course I'm going to put a body there. Okay, so we have an error here. We will discuss that in a second. But this syntax here is very awesome because now when we talk about objects in this case, an array list in this case is just an object, right? Which we can add things to it. So what are we doing here is that we're going to create a variable name. Now this can be anything. It could be names or n, right? Or stuff, whatever we want. So I just add names. In fact, let me say names just to differentiate from the actual array list. So we're creating a string names, which will hold all of the names values, array lists, as we iterate through. So each time we go through, the first item that we get bond is going to be inside of our names. Okay, so now we can use these names to get the values each time as we go through of our array list. Okay, it's very simple. So we're saying here, create a variable, and then call and say we are passing this name here all into this name's string variable. So we're extracting every item from our array list into this variable here as we go through. Now we're having a problem here because, as we said before, we did not specify what types we are expecting inside of our array list, right? In fact, if we come down here and say string, this will be fine. And now we don't have any problems here. In fact, it says name is already defined. So let's just say n to make it better. Okay, n like that. Notice that now we have no problem. Now, the thing about this is that, okay, this is fine and all. We can leave the way it is and things will work. But then we have this, not an error, but it is something that the IDE is saying that, this is probably not a good idea to do so. Therefore, we need to make it the way it was. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead, put it back like this. And of course, the reason why this changed to object is because we say that this array list here is very generic. So it just accepts any object. Meaning now this, when we say this n variable here, it's just going to be a generic object. Therefore, we have no error. So this could have strings, could have integers, could have booleans, doubles, whatever we want to add, it would still work. But in order for us to loop through, we have to say the type of variable that we're creating, which will hold each item as we go through the array list, must be of a generic object. Does that make sense? So in this case here, I can come down here and say s out, if I can type, of course, and say n. Let's see what's going to happen. I'm going to quick run here and hope for the best, folks. And what do you see? It says Bond, names, Bonnie, and Arnold. Just to differentiate from whatever we had before here. Let's see what's going to happen again. The same thing, but at least we'll know that we are getting the right item. So Bond, James. In fact, let's go further and say names as such. And plus, save, Command R. Let's see what's going to happen. There we go. Now we can see it says names, Bond, names, James, Bonnie, Arnold. So this is how creative I am. The names, they're very not creative at all. But nonetheless, this works. Very good. So you can see now we have this clever for loop that I like to call it. And it's very helpful because it's succinct. It doesn't require a lot of fors and doesn't require a lot of expressions inside here to control our loop and all that stuff. So this is easier on the eye as well. Okay, so play around with this concept, folks. This is your thing. Play around with this, see how far you get, and make sure that you understand the distinction here that we made, right? So if you make this array string, then you can just put a specific type string, because that would imply that we know exactly what types we are expecting. At this point here, this is a very generic array list. So like I said, we could put all sort of types and it will still work. However, when it comes here, we have to also make sure that it's just a generic object type. Oh, by the way, this object here, it is indeed that object that we talked about, that it's very generic, that all classes in Java conform to or inherit from. Ah, the beauty of Java. I'll see you next.